Welcome to Rooted and Rising, the podcast that brings you unfiltered discussions with nonprofit visionaries. Together, we'll uncover practical solutions and inspire connections that elevate your mission. Now, here's your host, Shannon Onderko.
I'm sitting here today with Shannon Onderko of Elevate Consulting, and Shannon and I just met a few months ago, and she asked me to be on her introduction podcast, which is an honor. I'm not sure why I was selected to do that, but hopefully it is because you have some exciting things you want to share about what you're doing here in Erie, Pennsylvania. So today's first episode is all about learning about you and your business and who you want to help and serve through that business. So Shannon, thanks for having me on your first ever podcast.
Well, so I think you pulled the short stick, right?
Yeah, I think so, maybe. Yes, I feel that way. No. So yeah, tell us about yourself. Like I just loved, like I said, I just kind of met you recently at Erie Homecoming, and you reached out after that. You've got an amazing background and lots of great experience. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
It's such a mishmash, right? So I was never lucky enough to have this like end goal of what I wanted out of a career. You know, like some people are like, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. Never happened for me. So when I went to college, I kind of entered the program that would take me, right? And then switched gears more times than my parents would like to count, right? So I ended up getting an undergraduate degree in psychology, went on, got my master's degree in education, got out of school, couldn't get a job, still had to pay my school loans. So I ended up in manufacturing of all things. So I have over a decade of experience in corporate America. And it's weird. Like, I don't know if you've noticed, like, there's been kind of a shift in my generation of priorities. Like, sure. When it comes to, I look at my parents' generation, like, they basically live to work, right? Mm-hmm. You put your 40, 50 years in, retired, and that's when you started living your life. And I think for my generation, the priority is how do we find that balance, right? So how do we make an income so we can enjoy our life, but then also not be fully rooted in career and just focused on career, right? So that's why I started my business. Is I gained so much experience. It was such a wonderful opportunity, but the work-life balance wasn't there for me, right? So I have an 11-year-old daughter that I just want to be able to soak up all the time until she hates me at least, right? So it was important for me to be able to find something where I could live out my purpose and have my home life and do all the things. So I started Elevate, and it was mainly business consulting. Like, I don't know, for any entrepreneur, I feel like when you take that crazy step to leave that solid foundation of where you were working prior, you're just trying to figure out what your niche is. And full transparency, I still don't know what my niche is. I'm like figuring it out every day. It's more of what's the need and how can I help, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So starting my business was just going to say, okay, I have these transferable skills of working in corporate America, learned how to develop business systems, learned how to increase efficiencies, all the buzzwords that corporate America thrives on, right? So started that, and then I was like, wait, there's this other need, right? Specifically in the nonprofit sector, right? Because ultimately we have all these different organizations doing incredibly important work, wearing a million hats, right? So they don't have the resources to be able to allocate towards how do we get these programs funded, right? Because they're too busy doing the programming. So I realized that there was this need to come in, not only be able to support them in a way that it's consulting and business development, but also how do we fund it, right? Because it's a two-step process. You can have the best plan in place, but if you don't have the monies to be able to execute, you're kind of dead in the water a little bit.
Sure.
So looked for a way to be able to kind of leverage the business development side with the funding side. Yeah.
And that's how you're going to help, right?
That is how I'm going to help.
Yeah, that's
right?
amazing. And that's the mark of a good entrepreneur, is identifying a need and looking to fulfill it. And also kind of carving out your niche as you go, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's where you're at.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think so growing up, I've been in Erie my entire life. I left a little bit for college and came back, and it's such a wonderful place to live. And I think especially now, all the redevelopment that's happening, I think we're kind of late to the game, right? Like we have this wonderful, beautiful space on the lake that we're a little delayed in, I think, developing, right? We have it's just such a great place not only to live, but raise children. And so my priority is making sure we're getting money here so that families are able to stay, so that we can attract young talent to Erie. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And talk about like some of the, have you crossed paths with any nonprofits or clients or anybody locally that you've already maybe worked with or had conversations with that you're like, this is definitely validating what I thought people needed, and how have you maybe come along and offered some guidance already?
So I am privileged enough to be a consultant for a nonprofit partnership. So I've been able to get a really high level exposure to many of the nonprofits in town. And full transparency, our market is saturated, right? We have so many nonprofits all doing wonderful work. But when you're looking at the Erie community in general, the funding is somewhat limited, right? So you have this massive pool of individuals or organizations going after the funding and only so many donors. So I recognize the importance of that education, right? And that's kind of like phase one of my business is the education piece of teaching the importance of collaboration, because we can all ultimately work towards the same goal as individual nonprofits, but it opens us up for the opportunity to go after additional funding. And it's so, so important, right? Because it takes away the competition piece, right? Everyone's bringing their talents, and being able to support their mission through a different framework of getting additional support, right? It's a win-win. So I've worked with a few nonprofits in town already. I was lucky enough, St. Martin Center brought me on for a project that was specific to just the fight against homelessness, right? No big deal. We're just fighting against homelessness.
Right?
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to work with them and really kind of learn just how important their work is, and then be able to identify opportunities and see some of the relationships that they're currently managing and leveraging throughout the community to be able to support people. Because, let's be totally real. We are incredibly blessed. Some of these organizations, the work that they're doing, we can't begin to fathom, right? We can't really appreciate just how critical these services are, because we are going to work, we're doing our thing, we're having vacations with our families, and our kiddos want for nothing, right? So it's just being able to, I kind of think it's about getting into the trenches, right? And having this reality check of there are lives that are very, very different than ours. They need the support. And if we're not doing the work, they're not going to get the support.
Sure. And I think so historically, Erie has responded well to supporting nonprofits. It always blows my mind, number one, to what you said earlier, the market is saturated. There are so many amazing nonprofits in Erie. I learn about new ones every day. Mm-hmm. And then Erie Gives Day is an annual huge fundraising event for nonprofits. And every year Erie shows up and we continue to give and we set new records and we make it very hard on people to pick who and how they want to support so many worthy nonprofits. But I think it's great to give. For sure, keep doing that. If you support local nonprofits, that's amazing. And obviously that's important. But I also think it's important for people to see, like you said, what it's like in the trenches of some of these nonprofits. I've had the privilege to share and document some stories about the work these nonprofits are doing, as you said, quote unquote, in the trenches. And I think even beyond just the generosity of people, it's the education piece too, is showing them like, did you know? Thank you for donating to this organization. We are so fortunate for you. But did you know this is actually what we're doing with your dollars and how we're truly living it out? And these are the people that you're directly impacting. And telling those stories is so important in the nonprofit space, at least from my experience.
Of course. And I think it's all about building donor confidence, right? Individuals have to be passionate about the project. They have to be passionate about the work that the organization is doing. And talking about Erie Gives Day and Erie showing up, and it's absolutely wonderful. I think that there's the and then part of this, like what's next. And I think for nonprofits to be able to recognize that if you've won any of the grant opportunities in Erie, regardless of whatever foundation you've applied to, that is such a good stepping stone to be able to build your portfolio of other grant opportunities. Because I think there needs to be a distinction. Even though you are a nonprofit, it's a business. You have to run it as a business, right? So part of that is showing, hey, listen, we've won XYZ grant opportunity before. So we are showing and demonstrating sustainability and interest of partnership, and then taking those opportunities outside of Erie. So part of my role at NPP is identifying additional funding opportunities across the U.S., whether that would be private foundations, state, federal projects, things of that nature. So where else can we find this funding to continue to do such great work?
Amazing. So yeah, you are a very important piece to the world of nonprofits in Erie, Pennsylvania. And the reason we're sitting here today, kind of kicking off a new initiative to you, is because you are wanting to start a podcast. And so let's talk a little bit about that. I've had my fair share of experience either launching my own podcast or being a part of producing them, being guests. I think they're a fabulous way to tell stories. Yes, people are like, oh, another podcast. But in my opinion, you cannot have too many podcasts, because all it is a great platform and a tool for sharing stories and getting out information to people. So keep making the podcast, people. And Shannon is doing just that. We are launching your podcast. You're calling it Rooted and Rising. Tell me a little bit about how this came about. I'm sure you didn't just wake up one day and say, I want to do a podcast. I've been talking with you for several months in the planning process of this, and today we finally get to hit record and do it. So where did this kind of idea come from, and where do you see this podcast going?
So it's funny because I have to say it's my 11-year-old child, right? She's the driving force and my biggest critic in my business, right? So I'm like, how do I get in front of someone and have their full attention? And when I say that someone, I'm thinking about my kid. So I'm trying to be hip, Chris, is really what's going on.
Aren't we all?
I'm trying to be hip. And I hear this is the way that we have to be hip these days. So I'm fully bought into it. But really, it just came down to having a space that's created for nonprofit organizations to be able to share in the normalcy of the struggle, right? Because the work itself is hard. And it doesn't take much. All you have to do is swing through any of the nonprofits in town, and 10 minutes of observation, you'll be exhausted, right? So I think it's about normalizing that, giving the space to collaborate. How can we help each other? It doesn't necessarily need to be, competitive in nature. When we talk about going after grant awards, I mean, that is really what it comes down to, is who sold their story best, right? So creating a space where we can come together and say, if we work together, we could build such a bigger story and have so much more impact. So I know that you have done some stuff with Ellen, with NPP, and showcasing the great work that nonprofits are doing, which I think is essential. But this is like, okay, well, what's next? Mm-hmm. What's next? What are the problems? How do we fix them together?
Yeah, just having open conversations about the struggles of nonprofit world. I feel like too often nonprofits don't have a platform to be like, truthfully, I'm exhausted. Truthfully, we're underfunded. Truthfully, I'm wearing 150 hats and I need more volunteers. So this will be a great opportunity to have some of those candid conversations with some nonprofit leaders, and also just to tap into your expertise and experience with coming alongside many of those nonprofits. So I'm excited to see the podcast grow. I'm excited to see who's going to be coming in and out of this studio. Eventually, I will sneak back behind the camera again and let somebody way cooler and way more qualified sit here. But I'm excited for you. Tell folks that might want to learn more about you, like what's the best way to get in touch with you? Maybe if they're like, hey, I want to be on Shannon's new podcast, what are some ways they can get in touch with you?
Well, first of all, the list is going to be long because right now the list is you. So they're going to have to wait and be patient. But I do have a website if anyone ever wants to touch base with me. It is www.elevateconsultingsvcs.com.
Awesome.
And I also have a space at Radius, so feel free to pop by anytime.
Good.
Love visitors.
Yeah, we love visitors at Radius. As a member myself, it's always good to see. I love actually seeing people get off the elevator and look lost, because I'm like, hey, you're new here.
Right.
Let me show you around. Let me introduce you to people. So if I see someone looking lost, the first thing I'll ask them is, are you here for Shannon's podcast? How about that?
Absolutely.
And even if they say no, we'll pull them in.
They are now officially unofficially sign up for the podcast.
Great. Hey, you got to get guests somehow.
I get it.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for letting me kind of kick off this podcast. Once you have millions of subscribers, don't forget that I was your first guest.
100%.
And I definitely encourage people to check out your website, Elevate Consulting, SVCS.com. Thank you. And by all means, reach out to Shannon and get in touch with her because she's doing great work for nonprofits. And be sure to start to subscribe to the podcast, the videos, because more great guests and content to come.
Love it.
Congrats, Shannon. I'm excited for you.
Thanks.